So I wonder how many of you have noticed that life is really a big cycle. Anybody ever notice this? When you think about it, what happens? Everyone is born, and then they grow. Most of you mature, right? Then you end up aging, and one day then you die. Welcome to the Global Leadership Summit, where I'm here to encourage you about your great future. The truth of the matter is life is a cycle. In fact, I'm 52 years of age right now, and my body is aging. I get up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. No one ever told me that was coming. Why didn't anybody ever tell me? I recognize life is a cycle, and my life will not last forever. The same is true of all organizations around the world. Your specific organization, just like people, all organizations have life cycles. Your business, your ministry, your nonprofit, it goes through different cycles. I want to talk to you for a moment about organizational life cycles, and this idea goes all the way back to the early 1900s or so. Depending on who you read, and there are many great different teachers on organizational life cycles, but they will show you that every organization will go through at least 5 different cycles. The first is when the organization is born, the birthing cycle, and just like giving birth, of which that's something I've never done, but my wife's done it 6 times, and I can confidently say I would never want to do that. Giving birth is very, very difficult. It's painful. You feel like you don't have the right resources. You don't know if you have the energy to get the rocket off the ground. You're trying to assemble people. You're trying to incorporate. You don't know for sure if you're going to make it. It's very difficult. Then you go through what some might call a growth cycle, which is difficult, but it's difficult for different reasons. Now you recognize, oh my goodness, this is great. We're actually growing. We're not going to die immediately. But we may die in the growth because the growth is so difficult. We're trying to find the right people. We may be short on cash flow. We might not have the right systems. We're growing, and it's still difficult, but it's fun. Then you might hit a stage some would call maturity, or they might call this prime, or they might call it the flow, where you're going, wow, this is really working. We have the right people, we have the right systems, we have the right culture, we have the right structure, things are flowing, we're in prime, this is maturity. Then at some point, unfortunately, organizations hit a stage you might call decline. Some would call this the rut or the treadmill. When suddenly what used to be easy is more difficult, what used to be fun is not as fun, morale may be rather low, frustration is high, it's hard to get anything done. Things get bogged down in meetings. There's bureaucratic log jams everywhere. Some of you, I might be talking about your organization right now. If you don't change and if you don't adapt, then you enter into the death cycle where, just like all people, eventually we die. Over time, organizations will go through a life cycle. What tends to happen when you're somewhere around here is most leaders think we need to do what we used to do. We just need to do it better. We need to try harder. It's a little bit like if you ever go and push the button on an elevator and you're waiting for the elevator to come. But after you push the button, the elevator doesn't come. What then do you do if you're like me? You what? You push the button even harder. You've already pushed it once, but you think if I just do it harder, if I just do it better, then things are going to work. What we need to recognize, leaders, is our world has significantly changed. And because our world has changed, we too need to change. I want to give you some good news and some bad news. What do you want first? I'm going to give you the bad news, and we're going to get that out of the way. The bad news is that every major crisis creates unexpected problems. You know that. Duh. COVID-19 has created all sorts of problems in the world. You know that. That's the bad news. The good news, though, is this, that every major crisis also creates unprecedented opportunities if you have eyes to see. Wherever you are in your organizational life cycle, because of what's going on in the world today, you would be wise to be agile. You would be wise to shift and look for new opportunities. You would be wise to pivot. I have pivoted so much, I'm about to lose one leg. And in this season, it can be really, really scary because you feel the weight of leadership. If you make the wrong decision, you might unintentionally accelerate the decline. And even if you get it right, you recognize the very scary truth, and that is sometimes things have to get worse before they get better. Sometimes things have to get worse before they get better. Another stage of the life cycle could be reinvention. It could be an overhaul. And if you're wise enough to look for the opportunities that are there today, you can recreate what you're doing and start into a new season of growth, a new season of expansion, a new life cycle of impact if, and here's the title of my message, if you have the courage to lead through the dip. Lead through the dip. I want to talk to you today about what it takes to adapt, to pivot, to continue to succeed, and have the courage to lead through the dip. Now, for those of you that were with us at last year's summit, I gave you some language that might have been new for you. We talked about bending the curve. I had no idea just how incredibly appropriate that would be in our season. We talked about GITMO. Anybody remember GITMO? GETMO. It stands for good enough to move on. What I like to do when possible is introduce language or a phrase that you can integrate into your organization's vocabulary. Today, I want to give you a phrase, leading through the dip, that perhaps might become useful to your leaders as you discuss, as you plan, how can we continue to be successful or even recreate ourselves as we move forward. I'll give you some examples of how you might use this. You might be delegating to a new staff member, and you know that he or she might not be great at the specific leadership responsibility yet, and so you might be able to say that we're gonna go through a little developmental dip. Things may have to get worse before she becomes really, really good, and it's a developmental tip. Or you might be overhauling the systems in your organization, and so you might say, we might have to endure a little bit of an efficiency dip. Or you might be leading a church and you're gonna try to change the culture of your church so you can continue to reach younger generations. And you might say, well, we might have to go through a little bit of an attendance dip in order to reach more people. In other words, no matter what you lead, there will come a time when you'll have to take a risk to continue to grow, to thrive, to reach people in this ever-changing world. You will have to have the courage to lead through the dip. So leaders, how do we do it? How do we recognize the potential opportunities and lead our organizations through what may be a difficult time to a greater level of impact? And what I want to do is give you 4 different thoughts to lead through the dip. The first one, if you're taking notes, is this. We need to change how we think about change. I want to encourage you. Change how you think about change. In fact, it's really commonly believed, if I sat down and asked you, what do people think about change? Most of you would say people hate change. Don't change me, don't mess with my things. People tend to hate change. But the truth is, people really don't mind change. Think about it. People like to change their hairstyles occasionally. People like to change their clothes, hopefully every now and then. I like to get a new outfit. Some of you would love to change it up right now. You'd give anything different than another Zoom meeting. Please give me something different. People would change where they travel. How many of you remember what it's like to travel way back in 2019? Remember that? Some people like to change where they would travel. People will even ask for help in order to change. In other words, like if you put on the quarantine 15, maybe you put on a little weight, You would pay, some of you, a trainer to help you take the weight off, or you might buy a book that would teach you a certain diet. In other words, when we change how we think about change, we have to recognize people don't hate change. They hate the way we try to change them. So important. Leaders embrace this truth. People don't hate change. They hate the way we try to change them. I'll give you an example. I'll tell you a story about a lady I'm gonna call Fran. That's not her real name. But back when I was a very young leader attending the Global Leadership Summit in my 20s, I was an associate pastor at a church, and I brought some young guys who were not Christians or not spiritual to church one day, and they made the massive mistake of sitting down in Fran's seat. Fran had been sitting in that seat probably since the late 1700s or so. In fact, back when I was in seminary, I had a professor that said, every single church has one fiery, mean old lady. It's a spiritual principle. If your church has one, it's evidently there's one in every church. My professor told me, you can strike her down, the devil will raise up two in her place. I don't know if that's true or not, but Fran would have qualified for a grumpy old lady. And when my friends came there, she ran them off, and I was devastated. I said, Fran, you can't do it. She said, that's my seat. And so I tried to change the way I helped Fran think about things, and I asked her, I said, hey, I'm curious, do you have any young adults in your life that you care about? And her whole demeanor changed, and she told me about her grandson who was on drugs and was really far from God. I said, Fran, what do you think would happen if he came to church and someone ran him off like you did? And she just froze. And she looked so sad. She said, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize and I let the pressure off. I said, no, don't worry about that. Let's just think about the future. So how about if I pray for your grandson, and then how about anytime you see someone that reminds you of him, or maybe it's a young girl about their age, you just welcome them and make them feel loved. Well, let me tell you what, we had a young adult ministry on Friday nights. Fran came every week and prayed over each chair that would represent each person and hugged everybody who came in. I want to say it clearly, people don't hate change. They hate the way we try to change them. As leaders, anytime you face a significant challenge, it's our responsibility to lead change. But for things to get better, sometimes you have to have the courage to lead through the dip, and you'll want to change how you think about change. If you're struggling right now, your biggest temptation is to blame someone or something else. Well, it's all COVID-19's response. It's its fault. My daughter, Joy, she's 15. She said, Dad, I can't wait to have kids because the moment they ask me to go anywhere, I'm going to tell them no. Then I'm going to tell them, when I was your age, I wasn't allowed to go anywhere for a whole year. I just thought that was funny. She's planning her future parenting skills. It's COVID-19's response, or it's the economy's fault, or my staff just won't work efficiently from home, or if you're in ministry, you can always blame lazy Christians fault, or it's the devil's fault, or if all else fails, you can always blame millennials. It's always millennials' fault. And all the millennials said, okay, Boomer, that's your response. The bottom line is this: great leaders never cast blame. Great leaders never cast blame. What do great leaders do? Great leaders take responsibility. We take responsibility. We lead through the dip. People don't hate change. They hate the way that we try to change them. So what we never do as leaders is we never ever say, our people won't. In our organization, they won't. We can't because they won't. We never say our people won't. What we say is, we have not led them to. We take responsibility. Whatever you're facing, you have the ability to lead. That's what you are. You're a leader. We don't cast blame. We take responsibility. We never say, oh, they won't, We say, we have not led them to. Leaders, hear it and take it to the bank. You can make excuses or you can make progress, but you can't make both. Somebody, it's time to change the way you think about change. What's easy, and I know at my age, I feel it, what we're tempted to do somewhere in here is we want to dig our heels in. We want to say, but this is how we do it. This is the right way. We want to keep our old assumptions and say, but this is the way that I want to do it. Listen, if you ignore the changes around you and all you do is work to guard the way you've always done it before, leaders, your desire to hold the fort may lead you to lose the war. Feel it. The world has changed. Our perspective and how we lead should change. There are new threats and there are new opportunities. Don't fight to guard the old way when perhaps you can find a new and a better way. How do we lead through the dip? Well, the first thing we have to do is change how we think about change. The second principle, I promise for some of you, this will free you and help give you permission to move forward in a way that you felt bound before. Number one, change how you think about change. Number two, have the courage to unmake promises. Have the courage to unmake promises. If you want to effectively lead through the dip, I promise you'll likely have to unmake some promises. In fact, what do we know are two of the most unifying statements on planet Earth? Two of the most unifying statements would be, number one, we will never, or we will always. And I'm guessing that you've made some type of a promise like that. We will always care about customers over profit. We will always treat everyone on our team like their family. We'll never be like one of those greedy, evil mega churches. As long as I have a voice, I don't know what you said, we'll never close this department. We'll never shut down this program. And we will never let soft drinks in the sanctuary. These bold, definitive, apparently irreversible declarations are helpful and valuable and productive until they're not. Leaders, if you're not careful, your boldest declarations could become your greatest limitations. Let me say it again. If you're not careful, those promises that you feel like are irreversible could eventually hold you back. Your boldest declarations could become your greatest limitations. We do have new challenges today like never before, but we also have new opportunities, and new opportunities demand a change of thinking. So what's the application? Whenever an old mindset is limiting your future, have the courage to unmake a promise. Let me explain this to you. Notice I didn't say break a promise, but I said unmake a promise. And this isn't a play on words. This is very accurate and true. In other words, what you're saying is we do have integrity. We've kept the promise that we made for all these years, but now because we know more and because the world is different, or because we have new threats, or because we have new opportunities, what we're doing is we're changing our strategy. We promised to do it that way, but now we're unmaking that promise and we're changing our strategy. I'll give you an example. Our church, Life Church, invented and innovated the very first church online platform back in 2006. And we're honored to minister to tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people in countries around the world weekly on a church online platform. Well, in 2006, 07, 08, 09, 2010, 11, 12, there were thousands of churches, tens of thousands of churches that boldly declared, we will never do church online. And they criticized us heavily, and we just said, well, as long as you're debating the validity of it or not, we're gonna continue to do ministry and do anything short of sin to reach people that don't know Christ. And so we just aggressively plowed forward. And then one day we found out that other churches would like to do it, but they didn't have the resources. And so we gave away the platform, and there were, in early 2020, about 3,000 churches using the free Life Church Online platform to stream online. Enter a change in the world, a global pandemic. And there were tens of thousands of pastors who were very, very wise to unmake a promise. We will never do church online. We can no longer meet in buildings. Uh-oh. What we knew then was true to our values, but because the world has changed, we're gonna unmake our promise and move church online. We are very honored today, as we were giving away the platform to 3,000 churches, to now have over 27,000 churches signed up to use the free online platform. You may need to have the courage to unmake a promise. Let me give you a business example that you might enjoy. Those of you that may be around my age, or maybe you're a little bit older, when you think of music, I'm guessing that you might have had a mixtape. Anybody have a mixtape? Did you play it on a boombox? If you know what a boombox is, raise your hand, thank you. If that's you, you might have, if you're my age or older, you might remember walking all the way to the television to actually turn the station. You remember that? You may remember talking on a landline, maybe remember paying long distance, may remember your mom or dad being able to pick up on the landline and hear your conversation when you talk to your girlfriend or boyfriend until 2 in the morning, and you would not hang up whatsoever. You would just say, I'm not gonna hang up, you hang up, I'm not gonna hang up, you hang up, you hang up, I'm not gonna hang up, you hang up. And then you would just sit there and breathe for an hour or so. I'm not talking about like inappropriate breathing, just breathe and just listen to each other breathe. If you know what I'm talking about, chances are very, very good that if your family had the money, you very likely had a National Geographic magazine sitting on your coffee table. Anybody know what I'm talking about? You very likely had a stack of National Geographic magazines somewhere in your house. To tell you a little bit about National Geographic, they published their very first magazine back in 1888. And were printing color photos in the very early 1900s. They were stable for a century. 1 century of effectiveness. That is amazing leadership and durability over time. They started to struggle in the 1990s. What do you think leadership did? Leadership did not stick to a model, but instead, they grasped and centered themselves around the mission. The mission is to explore and protect the planet. Let me tell you what their rally cry became, and let me tell you what it was not. Their rally cry was, expand the yellow borders. Their rally cry was not, print better magazines. This organization unmade some internal promises. Revenue did drop, they took some risks, and they expanded the boundaries with a diverse mix of reality TV series, partnering with celebrities, and now are a powerhouse on social media with Instagram soon approaching 200 million followers. What does this mean to you? To lead through the dip, you might need to unmake some promises, both organizationally and perhaps even personally. In fact, if I can get up into your business for just a second, I would ask you this. Have you made any personal promises limiting your leadership potential? Have you made any personal promises that may be holding back your potential influence because you're tied to something that you said in a time where you didn't know what you know now? Maybe you promised yourself or somebody else, I will always be in all the meetings no matter what. Or I would never let someone do that project for me. Or you promised, I will never bribe a 2-year-old throwing a fit in a grocery store. And now you have a 2-year-old and you have a crisis of belief. You're trying to figure out what to do. Leaders, we need to recognize the world has changed. Tell yourself the truth. Confront the brutal facts. The bottom line is this: you cannot correct what you will not confront. In order to lead through the dip, there's someone here, you need to change the way you think about change. Or perhaps, number 2, you need to unmake some promises. The third principle we need to lead through the dip is this. Number 3, you must obsess over the why. Why is it that we're doing this? Why is it that we're stepping into turmoil? Why is it that we are dipping with the hopes of rising again? Anytime that you find yourself leading through something, people may initially resist change. In fact, when you think about the reasons people change, there's only 2 reasons why people change. Number 1, they change out of desperation. Number 2, they change out of inspiration. Desperation, they change whenever they have to change. In other words, the doctor says, if you don't stop doing this, you're gonna die. Or they change out of inspiration. Wow, I've got grandkids and I wanna live to see them, so I'm gonna stop doing this thing. They change out of desperation or inspiration. As leaders, what we wanna do is we wanna inspire our teams to change before they have to. And the reason is it's easier to change on your terms than when you're in big trouble. What happens when you aggressively or intentionally decide we're going to lead through change? Every time you start to lead through change, you will have 3 reactions to change. You'll have critics, you'll have bystanders, and you will have advocates. Every time you go to lead through change, you'll have critics. I hate this and this is stupid. And the critics arm themselves. You have to remember, the critics will always be the loudest. In fact, the loudest boos come from the cheapest seats. Ooh, I like saying that. The loudest are always going to criticize. But leaders, you have to remember, just because they're the loudest doesn't mean they're the most. If you only listen to the loud, you might actually miss those who are most important. What do? You give them the why. Here's why we're doing this. Here's our strategy. Here's what we're hoping. We acknowledge there might be a dip, but what I want to do is I want to explain to you very, very clearly, here's why we are responding. Here's why we're initiating. Here's why we're leading in the way that we're leading. What does the why do to the 3 different responses? Well, the why disarms the critics. The why educates the bystanders. And the why empowers the advocates. Let me explain. The why disarms the critics. Not all critics. Some critics are just gonna be critics by nature. But a reasonable critic who says, I don't like that, without understanding the full context, might hear clearly your why and say, well, that sounds reasonable. That makes sense. A clearly presented why will often disarm the critics and may even convert them to being believers. What else does the why do? Well, it educates the bystanders. We know that in many organizations, about 80% of the people just kind of go with the flow. They're just bystanders. When you clearly give them the why, suddenly they might move from being a bystander to someone who actually helps you move the mission forward. Because they say, well, that makes sense. Oh, I like that. Oh, I see why this difficulty might actually lead to something better. And it empowers them, it educates them to move forward with the mission. And then finally, you have the advocates, those who are with you and for you. The why actually empowers the advocates. It gives them language, it gives them data, it gives them statistics, it gives them a very clear presentation that they can come alongside you and help lead others toward the courage to move forward through the dip. It's the why, it's the why, it's the why. Whenever you're in the dip, we have to explain the why. Why do we explain the why? Because we can tolerate the pain as long as we know there is a purpose. We can tolerate the pain as long as we know we're going somewhere. Remember the why, remember the why. This is true personally as well. If your marriage is struggling and you go to counseling and suddenly you find yourself, things are getting worse, remember why you're there. We know things may have to get worse in order for them to get better. Some of you, unfortunately, right now, you hate it, but you're furloughing some employees. Clearly explain the why. Well, we care about the organization and we care about you, and we believe that if we do this, we can get things healthier, we can bring you back, and we can make a bigger impact even as we move forward. You might be reinventing the culture of your local church. We want to help be more relevant, and so we're looking for a millennial with holes in his jeans and spiky hair and tattoos to lead worship so the presence of God can come into our place or whatever. Yeah, I'm just joking about it. Well, why are you doing this when there might be a dip? We're doing it to reach Fran's grandson. This is the why. We can endure the pain if we know that there is a reason to move forward. This is why we're making the change, believing it will lead to a better result. As leaders, you have to have the courage, maybe more now than ever before, to lead through the dip. How do we effectively lead through the dip? Well, we're gonna change how we think about change. We're gonna have the courage to unmake some promises. We're going to obsess about the why. And number 4, I wanna encourage you to lead with confident uncertainty. To lead with confident uncertainty. Why should you continue to be confidently uncertain? Because you are most vulnerable when you are most confident. If you ask me now, what am I confident about in the future? Where are things going? What's gonna happen in the world? The only thing I'm completely confident about would be 2 things. Number 1 is I have no clue where things are going. I have no idea whatsoever. And number 2, I'm confident that I am around the right people to pivot, to see opportunities, to avoid threats, and to lead to a more effective and better tomorrow. I'm confident. I don't know what's coming, but I'm also confident that great leaders will find a way to lead. I know many of you are hurting right now. You're frustrated. You're worn out. You're emotionally exhausted and depleted. And you're leading through the dip. When you're leading through the dip, have the courage to admit it to your people. We're not gonna get it completely right. We're leading in uncharted territory. So what our goal is gonna be is very clear. We wanna limit the length and the depth of the dip. We don't wanna be down here for a long time. We wanna limit the depth of the dip. When things aren't working well, we're going to fail quickly. When things aren't going the right way, we're gonna adapt immediately. Will it be a risk every time you lead through the dip? Absolutely and completely, yes, it will be a risk. There are no guarantees. Sometimes when you intentionally take a faith risk, sometimes things pay off and sometimes they don't. You will feel afraid. Feel the fear and lead anyway. As leaders, we get comfortable to leading without complete confidence. We're not always sure. I'm more afraid when I think I'm sure than when I'm not sure. I find comfort in being unsure because that's when leadership is needed. Step in to the fear. Feel the fear and lead anyway. You know what I've discovered? Is that the pathway to your greatest potential is often straight through your greatest fear. Have the courage, leaders. Leaders lead. That's what we do. So how are we going to apply this talk? How are we going to take it from we're writing notes, we're here, we're learning, to bringing application to our leadership in our organizations? I want to give you 3 very clear application questions to go over with those at your host site or those with you online or wherever you're engaging in this content. Question number 1, ask yourself, What is no longer working and needs to be changed? Have the courage to tell the truth. What's no longer working and needs to be changed? Ask yourself as a leader, what's one promise you need to unmake? Hint, if you haven't unmade a promise recently, chances are you've plateaued in your leadership. What's one promise you might need to unmake? Ask yourself, what's one risk you need to take even if you feel afraid? We don't just hear, but we do. We're leaders. I want to wrap up this talk by being as honest and transparent with you as I can in my leadership. Like many of you, I have to chalk this up as the most difficult year of leadership that I've ever led through. And I've felt frustrated, exhausted. I've battled with depression as a leader who planted Life Church 25 years ago, and then suddenly our church couldn't meet. And as the metaphor, the shepherd of the flock, once we couldn't adequately care for the sheep, there's a sense of panic. And now in many cities we're allowed to meet again, but there are tons and tons of people that are not coming to a physical location and many that are not coming to an online location. And there's a sense of a spiritual weight. And honestly, in many ways, I feel like a failure. And for 25 years, I've jumped out of bed with this mission and this calling, and this is the how, and this is the why. And now I'm kind of at a place where I'm clear on the why, but the how is not nearly as clear as it used to be. I would say if you could pinpoint where I am, I'm somewhere right about here in the dip. And I had a conversation with one of my mentors. This one is a business mentor of mine, and he said one little thing that just kind of helped snap me out of it. And I want to tell you what he said to me, and perhaps it might help snap you out of it. Because my prayer is that you would have at least one life-altering, paradigm-shifting moment. And maybe for someone here, this is your moment. I was asking my mentor about the economy and about leadership and about the future. What does it look like for you in business? Because he's incredibly successful in business. And he just paused and kind of smiled and he said, whatever happens, happens. He said, we make money. That's what we do. We find value. We create value. And then he started going through past leadership. He said, we've done that with Trump. We did it under Obama. We did it under Bush. We did it under Clinton. He said, we just find value and we just make money. And when he said it, something inside of me just snapped. I'm not a business leader. I'm a spiritual leader. And we reach people. That's what we do. We make disciples. That's what we do. We preach the gospel. That's what we do. We're leaders. We lead. And suddenly it just dawned on me. In this season of the life cycle, we reach people and we led. And in this season of the life cycle, we reach people and we led. In this season of the life cycle, we reach people and we led. In this season of the life cycle, we reach people and we lead. That's what we do. That's what we do. That's what we do. That's what we do. That's who we are. We're just leaders. In fact, I serve a leader who knows how to lead through the dip. The leader I follow, his name is Jesus. And he gave his life. 3 days later, he rose from the dead. I serve a leader who knows how to lead through the dip. So whatever you do, if you're a teacher, your world is crazy right now. If you're a teacher, teach. If you're a builder, build. If you're a leader, lead. I am a pastor. I will lead. I will preach. I will lead like never before. Because our world needs confident, humble, bold, and integrity-fused leaders. Let's believe, every single one of us, that we will grow in our leadership. Why? Because we know everyone wins when the leader gets better. feel the fear, step in, lead through the dip. You can lead to a better tomorrow. Not only can you, but you will. Why? Because you're a leader, and leaders lead.